Well, hello, Ashley. It's so good to finally have you on my show.
Thank you,
I
Jamie.
yeah, I just want to let people know that I met you on Instagram. I meet a lot of people on Instagram. It's an amazing breast cancer community, and I have found the most authentic, valuable people on Instagram. And I happened to find you. I actually saw you on a live, and was it her too? What was
Mm-hmm. Her two
yeah.
nonprofit. Yeah. Shout out to Lena. Whoop, whoop.
Awesome. Well, we will put their link in the show notes as well. So, whatever we mention here, we'll put them in the show notes with resources.
Awesome.
I will say that I was just so impressed with you. I fell in love with you immediately because you're so stinking cute. Number one. And number two, you have quite a story and you are one tough cookie, as you coin yourself. And you have such an incredible story that I just wanted to have you on here because I feel like your story is so valuable, and people need to know about your type of cancer, how old you were, what your circumstances were. So, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Hi, Jamie. Thank you so much for having me on. I was so thrilled when you reached out. It's just, I really appreciate your platform and really value the work that you're doing. I feel like there's just so much similarity between us in terms of our interests, our passion, why we are on social media, what we're doing with it. So I'm just thrilled. So thank you for having me. Um, yeah, one tough cookie, my story, where to begin? Well, I'm actually going to go way back for a quick second.
Okay.
And I'm going to start when I was 12 years old. When I was 12 years old, my mom was diagnosed with stage 0 DCIS. So, that is, what is it? The ductal carcinoma. So it was not invasive. So, it was very much like stage 0, right at the cellular level. They caught it really early. She caught it at 37. That's a different story, but the short version is that she had access to mammograms early. Thank God her doctor actually said, yeah, let's just do it. We unfortunately had a neighbor who was a family friend of ours who caught her cancer later and died from her breast cancer. And so, as part of that, her name was Eva. Eva said to my mom, always take good care of yourself, always get checked. Just do it for me. You have no signs, symptoms, you're young, you have no history. Just do it for me. And she had access to mammograms early. She was a healthcare provider, she was a nurse, and she got screened just because she was basically told, to do that, just do that for me. And so because of Eva, she went in and they caught it at stage 0.
Wow.
So it was just a really freak thing. We have no history of cancer in our family. So at 12 years old, I watched my mom go through her mastectomy. She didn't need chemotherapy given her diagnosis and her staging at the time. This was back in the early 90s. So yeah, that's where things started for me. So I have memories of watching her recover and go through that. But that also meant that I knew that I needed to be very cautious and get screenings early myself. So she didn't have any genetic mutations. She did genetic testing. I did genetic testing in my late 20s, early 30s, and had no markers. Yet, despite all of that, just the fact that I had a history of mom who had breast cancer, that with a number of other factors, they do some risk assessment and they ask all sorts of different questions like, how old you were when you started menstruating, did you have children? What ages did you have your children? A bunch of other factors. And so all things considered, including mom's history, it came out that I had a 23% chance of developing breast cancer in my lifetime with no genetic mutations in my panel. And so that because of that, it actually gave me access to early screenings with my insurance company. So I started getting mammograms in my early 30s and then bumped that up to twice annual. So I would get a mammogram and then 6 months later, I would get a breast MRI with contrast. And so I was doing that rotation for many years. And I built it into my lifestyle. I made sure I was always on time. I did it. You get your scans, you get your results, you move on. But that was my life for many, many years until January 4th of 2023. So this past year, almost a year ago, I'm going to start hitting all those 1-year anniversaries now.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
January 4th, 23. So let me back up. May of 22, I went and got my breast MRI. Perfectly clear. Everything was good. No signs, no tumors, nothing. January 4th of 23. So that was, and there was a delay for the first time. I'd never had a delay in my screenings, but I went to go schedule mine in, I think it was like November. And they couldn't, like when I went to go schedule it for November, they couldn't get me in because there's such a shortage of, folks who can do this. They couldn't get me until January 4th. First time I've ever been kind of bumped, but I didn't think anything of it. January 4th rolls around, I go get my mammogram, and that's the first time I get a notification like, hey, we need to bring you back. So it was a process, as we know the process, right? Went back in for mammogram. I got an ultrasound. They couldn't tell what it looked like. I mean, it looked sort of, like normal, like it still could have been a cyst of some sort. And through the biopsy, they were able to determine that it was invasive, so IDC, so invasive ductal carcinoma, which was different than my mom's DCIS.
Mm-hmm. So that must have been pretty aggressive then if you had just been in May.
Yep.
And by the time January rolls around, you have this breast cancer that they didn't even detect.
And that is part of why I'm here. It's part of kind of my story to really emphasize we have to know our bodies, we have to know our risk, and do not delay, do not wait on getting your screening. Stay on top of it. It saved my life and it changed my course of treatment, my prognosis, because I stayed on top of it. And so that's a big part. I mean, it grew. It was already 1.5 centimeters. It was a tumor when they found it in January. And so it was very rapidly growing. And when the pathology came back in, it was considered a grade 3. So it was a higher grade. And they also do, I'm not sure if you remember this as part of your pathology, but it's good for folks to know. When you get a pathology for a biopsy, and it is cancer, they do also have this marker called the Ki-67, and that is your proliferation rate. So are you familiar with that one?
I don't think so.
Yeah. So it'd be interesting to go back and look at your path and see, for those of you that have a path report too, essentially what that is, and this is not my expertise, but man, do we get like literate in these things. We figure it out because we have to, but so a Ki-67 is basically like like you get a biopsy. So they take those cells and they look at them. And of those sample cells, right, of that sample, what percentage of them are proliferating? So growing quickly.
Okay.
So that's your proliferation rate. And that also connects to how fast growing this tumor is. For me, I think it was like 78% proliferation rate. So what that meant is 78% of those cells in my sample were quickly growing, which explains why this thing grew so fast.
Wow. Yeah. That's difficult to wrap your mind around, I bet.
It blew my mind. So for folks who haven't kind of gotten to know me through social media, like I was 39. So I was not 28, but I was also not 40. And if I had not gotten early screenings, gotten my risk assessment, and stayed on top of it, I'm not quite sure where I'd be if I started getting my screenings at 40.
Right.
It's a big deal.
That's about the time that I started getting them. I want to say, actually, it's been more probably after that because it's been about in the last 10 years. I'm 56. So I was diagnosed at 54. And so I know that I had started getting them maybe not even 10 years prior. And I don't remember why. I don't even remember why I started getting them. I don't know whether I have no idea if I could remember when it was that the first time that I got it, it would be really nice, because I had 2 lumpectomies in the past 10 years. And and I know that they finally told me that I had dense breast tissue. I remember
Mhm.
when they started telling me that. And I didn't know quite what that meant. I sort of did. I mean, of course, I know a lot more now, but I mean, good God. I mean, thank God you got your screenings early like that. I was very similar, that I had gotten my mammogram in June. I think it was like June 25th or something like that of 2021. And the only reason it was in June, I had been getting them in October for years, and my mammogram was pushed off because of COVID. And so I started getting them again in June. And I remember in June 4th of 2020, or excuse me, a few days before June 4th. So it was about the third or second or first or maybe whatever. I remember getting a little ping on my phone saying, "Hey, it's time for your mammogram." So I go in like clockwork anytime I can get in there.
Mhm. Mhm.
Always did take that very seriously, especially at the fact that I had, two lumpectomies that were benign. And so I remember picking up the phone and making an appointment to come in, and they said, "Hey, do you feel anything? Do you all that?" And I'm like, no, I'm fine. And I thought to myself, it was going to be 3 weeks later that I was going to go in. And the only reason I had to wait 3 weeks is because they always make you wait 1 year plus 1 day. So I was going in on the 26th of June, and I thought, they'll find it. Hung up the phone. I was sitting outside with my husband having a beer, and he says, "That's not true. You do feel a lump." And I actually did feel a lump for a few months. And I
You
was just
did.
finishing out my career in the school district. And I
Yep.
remember feeling burning sensations and like stinging sensations every once in a while, going, "What was that? What was that?" And then it would go away. And I thought, okay, whatever. And so he says, "That's not true," because he felt the lump too, but I have lumpy breasts because they were,
Yep.
dense. And
Yep.
so I didn't really think of anything of it, except for I thought to myself, this one feels different. So I picked the phone back up and
Um,
said, "That's not true. I do feel a lump and I do feel sensations." And so they moved it up by 3 weeks.
Good.
And I
Wow.
was able to get my mammogram that Tuesday, right after my retirement party. I had this enormous retirement party on the 4th. And by the 7th, I had my mammogram. After my mammogram, they called me back and said they found groupings of calcification and an associated mass. I had my radiologist friend who happened to be at my retirement party. He's actually going to be on one of my episodes that is going to be releasing this coming Sunday. He took a look at the results and called me that night and said it's a 95% chance or more that it is breast cancer. And so he was able to get my biopsy moved up by a week and a half or a week. And I got it that Friday. By Saturday afternoon, 24 hours later, he called me and told me that it was, in fact, HER2 positive, estrogen and progesterone negative with a 5 centimeter tumor.
5 centimeters. Yeah.
5. It was
Yep.
stage 2 at that point.
Yep.
And they didn't make it to my lymph nodes, so it was just stage 2. And so I went through all the chemo and all the things. So I guess the reason I wanted to bring that to light in light of your story is that these things can grow very quickly.
So fast.
I mean, luckily, you were able to get in, before, at least you were, I'm glad that you were. It would be interesting what it would have looked like in November.
It's really funny you say that. And I have actually asked that question to my oncologist. That was something that was sort of keeping me up at night. I'm like, what would it have looked like? Would that have changed anything? And I have an amazing oncologist out here in Colorado. And she's just her bedside manner is fantastic. She has done all of this with so much grace and compassion. And I just remember her face when I asked her, like, would something have been different if I went in when I needed to, like when I was recommended to? And she actually didn't give me a definitive answer, but she essentially said, from what I remember, right? Sometimes these conversations are so intense, it's hard to always remember, right? Like when you're in those moments, like with your oncologist, they get fuzzy sometimes just because they're so emotional. But I remember her basically saying to me, it's hard to know because this was growing so quickly. There is a possibility that something might have not even been visible or could have had trouble being detected in November. We just don't know that. You know, part of it is like, we're glad we caught it now because it actually could have allowed me to start treatment faster by having a delay in my treatment or in
Well, and
my
imagine,
screenings.
yeah, and imagine if you had gone in November and they didn't detect anything.
That's what she said to me. Yep.
Then where would you be? Yeah. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
And you know, I know there's so many different reasons for why there was a delay, but I do find the timing interesting. And you know, I'm religious as well, like I'm spiritual, and part of me is like, gosh, maybe there were some angels that were just, this is the one time I wasn't able to get in when I was supposed to. And we'll never know why, but it could have really been a game changer. Those 6 months could have really just changed things for me. So I'm
Yeah.
just sort of leaning into the fact that I'll never know that, but I'm so grateful we caught it on January 4th.
Yeah. Gosh, me too. So I want to go back a little bit and I want to ask, um, who was Ashley before breast cancer?
Oh, that's I've been thinking about this question all morning, and it's such a rich one, and I feel like we could talk all day about that. So I will, for podcast brevity's sake, I'll keep it short. I have always been a really hard worker. I have always taken so much pride in being a teacher and being an educator and being a student and being a wife and a parent. I lean all in. I'm, you know, full throttle with those things. And before I was diagnosed with breast cancer, I was carrying these things and life felt very heavy. I had a baby who's now 4 years old, 4.5. She was born in 2019. So if you think back, like baby 2019, 2020, the world shuts down. I happen to work in teacher education. And if you think about what was happening in 2020 with schools, my job is to help get new teachers certified and licensed, which you need to have clinical hours for. So when a lot of people were kind of at home and some of their jobs sort of stopped and there really wasn't a lot to do, mine sort of did the opposite, where I was working 100+ hour weeks. I was in my office, like on the phone with all of our district partners and my colleagues at other institutions. We were trying to figure out how the heck we were going to support all of our amazing students who were like in their student teaching year and they weren't able to be in schools. Like, what does that look like? How do they get their license? Working with the state. So it was just a really intense time and very stressful because the responsibility, you know, felt very heavy, felt very important. Um, so, and I have these visions of like my baby learning to walk and like tapping on the office windows, you know, and my husband was around and, you know, he'd be gathering them up. And I'm like, I wish I could be out there helping her learn to walk when I'm in, you know, my work was just all consuming at that point. So baby 2020, wild things happening job wise, feeling the stress and the weight of that. And that continued for a couple of years. And then just some really big projects once we did go back work wise, you know, that just required a lot of time and attention, important things. And all of that sort of happened in succession. And so when I kind of think back to like where I was and who I was right before I got diagnosed, I was this mom who was trying to just do it all and feeling really stretched thin and feeling like I needed a break. And then got the news. And so I feel like, you know, I remember walking into 2023 being like, this is my year. I'm going to recalibrate. I'm going to do better. I'm going to work out more. I'm going to take more time for myself. I'm going to really reprioritize things now that my big projects at work are sort of behind me, and wham.
And boy, did you recalibrate.
So
In a totally different way.
in every sense of the word, the universe heard me, and I'm like, that was not what I meant. Yeah. So that's who I was before. I was living a really full life, but also I just felt like a lot, and I needed to scale back. I was trying to find a way to just rebalance my life.
It's really interesting. You and I do have so much in common. Listening to you, because I've been asked that question before. And one of my first, I think it was my first episode, I had my friend John interview me, and it was about who was Jamie Vaughn before breast cancer. And that was a really interesting episode, because it really made me reflect on who I was. And my second episode was about the diagnosis, because we wanted to make sure that the audience kind of got to know who I was. And sometimes I do repeat things throughout, because I know that not everybody reads and like listens to it like a novel. I was a school teacher for 20 years, and I went through the whole pandemic and teaching at home and all the things. And the very last year, 2022, was my last year. My husband had already retired the year before. Or that year he was retired. That was his first year of retirement, 2022. And then we figured out a way for me to retire. And so I was excited to get out of the school district. I was sick and tired of it, all the BS that was going on. I was so exhausted. And I'm a stepmom of 3. They're all out of the house and stuff like that. We had 2 dogs. We, traveled. I actually work for a company called I Teach. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but I am an instructor. I'm still an instructor for them for a literacy course. Been doing that for like 3 years. I had a podcast for educators called Be That Teacher. So I had a million things going on, and it was a lot, there was a lot. And so when I finally had my last day at work, and then I had my retirement party, my thought was, this is the year I'm going to retire. Farrell and I are going to go camping. We're going to go travel, la, 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 recalibrate, and then la. So do you ever think, I'm just curious, do you ever think, because to me, in my bones, I feel like a lot of stress and trauma is what led to me being open for breast cancer. Everybody has the cells, right? So, but I just learned so much about our mental and emotional health, being really, really instrumental sometimes in our bodies end up saying no, and being open to being struck by cancer. Do you ever think that?
It's a great question. And it feels like a little bit of a rabbit hole to go down. For me, I mean, and this is I say this to myself, and I say this to the people watching and listening. It's not your fault that you get cancer, right? It is not our fault. It is not a moral failure. It is not a physical failure. It is something that happens, and we don't know why. We can't say that thing did this. Right. And I do feel like there's a lot of folks who feel shame and who kind of go on this downward spiral of like, why me? What did I do? We didn't do anything. And I don't think that I was living a life at the time that did me any favors. I was living a high stress life. I wasn't, I was trying to get out and exercise, and do what I could, but I was a parent, with young kids. I have 2 daughters. They're 4 and 9 now. There were a lot of things that didn't feel super balanced in my life at that time, especially because of COVID-19 and just the way that the world was functioning. It was stressful, right? We know that. So I do know that I was living in a space where I felt a lot of stress, and I was working hard to cope with that and like discharge that at the end of the day and do what I could and eat healthy. But I don't think I did myself any favors living in that space. But it's hard to say if it contributed to what happened to me on January 4th. I don't
So,
know.
so I like what you said. I like that because I have similar thoughts. I like that you said that it's not our fault. We didn't eat something that made it happen. There was no moral failure. But I also liked how you said, and I know I wasn't doing myself any favors. So recognizing some things, but knowing and being at peace with, I didn't do this to myself.
No.
And this is just something that happens to 1 in 8 women in their lifetime. And we need to kind of take the road of, let's educate people as much as we can, bring awareness to people about what their
Mhm.
options are and
Mhm.
what they should be doing to, screen and just be aware of their own bodies. And that's what all we can do, right? Is to be
Right.
able to help people for when they do get it, what they can do and what questions they can ask, what to look for in an oncologist, whatever it is, right?
Totally.
So
Yep.
yeah, interesting. So how did this affect your family, like your husband, your kids? How did that all go down?
Whew. Yeah. I feel like that's like a whole other episode, right?
Yeah.
So like with most things, everybody deals with things differently, right? I have a very close-knit family. I am very lucky that my mother, who was diagnosed at age 37, is still surviving. She was able to treat her breast cancer right away with surgery and has since been in remission. And it has been a gazillion years. That's the technical term, gazillion. So she's
'Cause-
been doing great, living a full, vibrant life. And my parents actually live about 10 minutes from me. They used to not. They used to live on the East Coast, and it's been several years since they've been out here. So it's been such a gift to have them close by. Um, and my younger brother, who's also a grown man with 2 sons and a wife, they actually ended up moving from the East Coast out here too several years ago. So I have my family nearby, within sort of a 40 minutes of me, which is pretty incredible. And I share that because all of those people played very tangible roles in my diagnosis and my treatment and my healing. And so proximity has been an important part of that. How we handled it, we all did different things. I think my mom really struggled. My parents struggled a lot with this. My mom, I think it brought up a lot of wounds that she had not healed when she was young. So that's a really interesting space that I feel like this sort of cracked open a lot of things that she sort of, and a lot of women do. And she did back in the 90s. Things were just different then.
Mhm.
Treatment options, the way people talk about it, everything is just different. Back then, she didn't talk about it. In fact, there were a lot of women that were her friends that really didn't even know that what she had been through. She struggled, I think, and part of that was because she needed to do some healing for herself as part of it, and that's complicated. And I'm so proud of her. She's
Do
grown a
you
lot.
do you think that she's got to be so proud of you? She has got to
Oh,
be,
yeah.
I mean, what you do in the name of our breast cancer community is huge. And I'm wondering if your mom has been able to heal because of that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's been this really beautiful and really messy opportunity for her to sort of cope with the things that she went through when she was younger. And it didn't give her any choice. Now her daughter was going through it. And not only was I going through it, it was, I would, longer and more complicated because I also had chemotherapy, something she didn't. So there were so many times where I feel like you could see her healing through having to just face the stuff that she didn't face when she was younger. Um, and she's so proud. And when I did decide to kind of take this into a more public sphere and put this on social media, that was something that I talked to her about, because it was such a private affair for our family when I was a kid. I also knew that that meant sharing news, because people would be like, why were you getting screenings in your 30s? Like, what is that about? It meant also having to share part of her story. And so it was important to me that she was okay with that. And she was. And I was just so proud of her, because that's not how she originally approached her cancer when she was younger. And, it was a different time, like I said. And she had her reasons for that. A lot of us do when we go through it privately. But I do think it has been an opportunity of healing, of going to chemotherapy with me, of watching me kind of go through my treatment, my surgeries. Like I said, they live close by, and we have a really lovely guest set up in our basement. And so even though she's right down the street, when I had my surgery in August of 23, she stayed the night, and she was there helping me shower and helping me strip my drains. And I think those different actions, helping me get up out of my chemo chair to run to the restroom, all those different pieces, helping me pick out a wig, had their own sort of journey for my mom. I think it was a really important space for her. And I could see her, at least from me, my perspective, I could see her starting to heal and starting to be more comfortable with her. There were so many times she would say to me, Ashley, this is so different from when I went through things. I'm so happy you're okay. And I'm so glad you're going through this now, because we didn't have this. And fill in the blank. It was so many different things that she said that about. It's so much better now. And I'm so happy that you get to have this experience. Not
Well,
that
and
she wanted me to have it, but that I was going through it in a
right,
different time.
of course. And she recognizes that. And you have two daughters
Oh yeah.
who,
Whew. Mm-hmm.
they're watching you go through this. So they are going to be well informed,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is so good, because we just don't know. And they'll be so well informed, and they will have a mom who has walked that walk. Um, how did your husband, what was your husband like as a caregiver?
Yeah. I realized I didn't talk about my actual like nuclear family doing that, but like my families, they've all kind of done different things. But my mom, I feel like that's important to talk about, because I feel like there's so much there.
So
Um,
much.
uh, my dad was amazing. He would make homemade turkey soup and bring it over so I could stomach stuff during chemo. And I mean, just everybody. My brother, he made this amazing blanket with photographs, and some of them were silly and like things that would make me laugh, of all the just different moments and things that he wanted me to bring with me. And I brought that blanket to the chemo, the infusion room. So everyone sort of like acknowledged and honored the journey in different ways. My husband, he is such a positive person. That's one thing that I just feel I could talk about him all day as well. He's such a even keeled, loving, calm, optimistic individual. That's just his disposition. Not in a way of like, sometimes it can be like toxic positivity, or like almost to the degree of like denial, where you're like, are you in touch with what's happening right now? He's not like that. He's just, he meets the moment, and he understands the reality of things. And yet he still does it with so much warmth and consistency and compassion. And so when I started going through all of this, he was my rock. That stability, creating a calm home, helping me have space to feel my feelings and it not really impact him in the way that like he was my steady Eddie. And he was a really important partner through this, because when I was feeling scared or overwhelmed, he helped me co-regulate, right? He helped regulate my system, remind me that we're moving through this together and that we're going to do it. We're going to be okay. And that was a game changer for me as a person going through this that felt really untethered at times. He helped remind me and ground me. throughout all of the different parts of this.
That's so wonderful to hear, because we know that there's a high statistic of divorces and things like that with diagnoses like this, which is so sad. And that
It's
is one of the,
unbelievable.
it's terrible. And we get married and our vows are in sickness and in health, right? And at the time when we get married, we know what it means, but we don't know what it means. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
you don't really know these things deep down in your bones until something like this happens. And my husband and I were the same way. He was a rock for me. We definitely had some challenges here and there, but we worked through it. Like, we did the
Mm-hmm.
work, we went to therapy, we still are in therapy. Because, when you're diagnosed, it's not just you, it's your husband,
It's
it's your
everyone.
kids, or, whatever. And,
Yep.
and so when a part of my efforts with having this podcast too is to bring awareness to relationships. And so I've had caregivers to their wives on my show. My husband and I have interviewed together, because I
Mm-hmm.
think it's really important for people to know what they're getting themselves into,
Mm-hmm.
and with no choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that my husband and I have more of a connection now than we did before. And we've always been very, very connected. Like, we've
Mm-hmm.
always been in love and all the things. And we've gone through ups and downs throughout our marriage. We've been together for, almost about 21 years. We've been married for 18, 19 years. And, we've had our ups and downs.
Sure.
And we've worked through them. I'm lucky to have someone who will actually go to therapy and things like that. But this was big. And we've had three major losses in our family in the past 4 years. His two dads, stepdad and biological father, and my mother.
Mm-hmm.
That was big time. And we did very well together during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this just happens to be another traumatic thing,
Oh.
but it's happening to his wife, right? Yeah. She's sick. She's, needing to go through all this stuff. I'm very lucky. We worked at it. And I always want to tell people, everybody needs to be empathetic and talk about things, like, have that conversation and work
Mm-hmm.
through it together. So I'm so glad that your husband is like that. It's just, you're both very lucky to have each other, because now you know what that really means in sickness and in health.
Yeah, he's been incredible. And he also has a job that just, um, it requires so much of his time. And it's not one of those things where you can put the work down and it'll be there waiting for you. He's a basketball coach. And so the games are the games, the season is the season. And I I felt badly, even though I know I shouldn't, and I shouldn't feel guilty, right? It's not my fault. I didn't do it. It's not like I picked that timing. But I do remember feeling really badly, like this was happening as we were heading into tournament time. I was starting chemo, right as like March was starting. And if you follow sports, especially like NCAA, March is a big deal in basketball. And I just remember being like, oh shoot, like, and
Yeah.
never once did he make me feel bad. Never once did his team or his our buff fam, like our basketball family, feel. Nobody ever made us feel bad. And he just continued to show up in different ways, and it was pretty incredible. And I do think that played a huge role in my success through treatment and through surgery, was just
Absolutely.
having a present, calm environment and a present, calm husband and partner. It changed everything for me.
And I think guilt, that is such a normal thing for us to feel, because I felt guilty too. I even told my husband, it's like, dude,
Ugh.
you can leave if you want to. Like, here's your out. Because I felt guilty, because he had just retired and was excited
Mm.
for me to retire. And then I get this
Mhm.
breast cancer. Now we had to get to deal with my first year of retirement with breast cancer. And he had all these things he wanted to do. And so we just
Yep.
changed the way we did them. I had my chemo every 3 weeks. And of course, the first week is terrible. You're kind of coming out of stuff, and around the second week. And then the third week, you feel pretty normal. So we would go camping. We would always
Nice.
have a place to go, and
Love that.
we went camping in places we had never been to, took the dogs, and so that was cool. I want to get into emotions. There are a lot of emotions that come along with this kind of diagnosis. What were some of the emotions? And I know there was some guilt and probably anger and all those things, but what were some of the emotions? And can you give our audience some ideas of how you maneuvered that? How did you walk through that?
Yeah. So I will preface this with emotions are something that I think and spent a lot of time studying, actually. So that's part of my scholarship as a researcher is affect and emotion. However, I study it often in like the context of education, teacher education, and thinking about working in K-12 schools. But I know a lot about emotion, and it's an area of interest to me just as a human. And you can study it, you can talk the talk, but it is a whole other thing to walk the walk. I don't care how well versed you are in theory. It's messy and it's hard and you don't get it right. So for me, I think, sorry, Siri just
Sorry
decided
about
to,
that.
Siri, I'm not talking to you. Yeah. So for me, I had so many different emotions and I continue to feel them. I'm going to share something I don't think I've shared with anybody else, but I will share it with you. When I first got diagnosed, I had a really odd emotion, and I'm going to share it because I just want to normalize that, like, there's really no right way to feel when you were first diagnosed. All emotions are valid, but I will say I think mine was less common. When I first got diagnosed, I, of course, felt very common feelings of just sadness and grief and anxiety. Mixed in there was a weird one for me, and that was like a little bit of relief. And I know that that's an odd one to say. Part of me was ready to slay the dragon that had been chasing me since I was 12 years old. And that's an odd thing to share, but it feels important to just put it out there that you just don't know what your brain's how you're gonna respond when you have those. And for me, this was this thing I did all the time. I was checking, I was running from this thing. I was trying to not get cancer. And then here it was. And so part of me was almost like, all right, here's my moment.
Finally.
I'm going to turn around. I'm going to do the damn thing. And of course, I don't want this. Relief isn't meaning that I was happy this
Right.
happened, but I think it was like this moment of like, okay, I'm not going to run anymore. There's no more of that. So that was sort of one that I wasn't expecting. And I just wanted to share it because we need to normalize that there's all sorts of ways that we feel about things. And they may be things we were like, what was that about? And that's okay, right? Like all feelings and emotions are valid. And, I was actually really positive during my treatment. And, I felt very optimistic and I was actually fairly joyful, like authentically joyful during treatment. I felt honored that I was able to get the treatment I needed, right? I felt so privileged to be able to be in a space where I was being cared for, that I was getting treated, that we were taking care of this cancer. I didn't love any minute of it. It was awful. And I was also just so joyful and grateful. I think I was in a space of gratitude. But when I finished treatment, so I finished treatment in July of 23, I had my double mastectomy in August. I would say September and October, I hit a wall of anger. The stuff came then. And I think it was because, for a lot of reasons, but for me, it was almost like my nervous system, once it registered that it was safe, when it felt like it could just take take it down a notch, that I was sort of through treatment, I was recovering, but something in my nervous system decided it felt safe. That's when the anger came. And that's when I realized, oh, I have a lot of healing that I've sort of unconsciously set aside or wasn't ready to deal with. My body was telling me it was not time. And the fact that I was feeling these waves of just anger and just frustration, and depression. And those were things that didn't come for me until later. And it was my way to also acknowledge like that I was healing because my body was allowing me to feel those feelings after treatment. So, healing is a really strange thing in the sense that like we just never know what's going to come and when it's going to come, and it's not linear, right? So there's a lot of surprises there, but how I've gotten through all of them is I let myself feel them. I think a lot of times when we're hit with uncomfortable emotions or unexpected emotions, we can, who wants to be uncomfortable, right? It's like a natural thing. We want to put that away. We want to throw that away, shove it somewhere. So a lot of times we minimize it. Oh, I'm just glad to be healthy. Or, oh, it wasn't that bad. Or we minimize, we cope in really unhealthy ways at times. We overwork or we overdrink or we, shift it and try to say, oh, we shouldn't be feeling bad. We have so much to be positive about. We do lots of things that kind of don't give ourselves permission to fully just sit with what we're feeling. And we often judge what we're feeling. And so something that I think has been really valuable for me and for I think a lot of other people is allowing myself to sit with the feelings, even if they're uncomfortable, even if it's the last thing I want to be doing in the moment. The only way through is through.
Mm-hmm.
And if we really are committed to our healing, we have to sit with what we're feeling and be present in it. And it's amazing how you can move through these things if you give yourself permission to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, so there's so much to unpack there. That's an episode in itself too. Going back to, you studied, this stuff, right? You in a teacher education thing, but even if we got to think about even therapists need
Oh,
therapy, right?
yeah.
Even therapists have, right? So it doesn't it makes sense that we don't really know really anything until we actually go through it. I do really think that it's interesting that you brought up relief because when you said at the beginning, I am going to bring one up that I've never brought up before, I knew it was going to be relief. I kept on
Really?
thinking she's going to say relief, and you did. And it's really interesting that you say that because that seems so understandable to me. That does
Really?
not seem abnormal to me.
Um,
No, because in reflection, even though I was angry, fearful, all the things when I
mhm,
found out,
mhm,
it is kind of interesting because when I was actually told, I already knew that it was a 95% chance or more. And then when Dr. Kaplan called me that Saturday to tell me, in fact, that I had it, it's almost interesting because I sort of had a wave of almost relief too, because, well, for a couple of reasons. And I never put my finger on that until you
yeah.
just said that,
Hmm.
because I also feel like I had been sort of being chased also. Number
Mhm.
one, because I started getting my mammograms. I believe it was like in my early 40s. Didn't really realize the impact of that or the significance of that really. But having two lumpectomies in the past 10 years, having friends have breast cancer. I had one breast cancer friend who said, my doctor told me that it's not a matter of if you're going to get breast cancer, it's a matter of when.
Hmm.
So I had already had that implanted in my mind that I'm probably going to get breast cancer someday.
Hmm.
And so when I was finally told, I did not freak out. I was very calm. I was sitting there with my husband. We were camping, and we had a couple friends of ours with us, and it was just like, well, the day has come.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really strange. My emotions came a little bit later.
Mm-hmm.
And I did go through all the feels, the anger, the fear. And I'm one of those people, Ashley, who also, and I understand it way more now, that I move through those emotions, and I don't find any shame in that. And I try to help normalize, help, making it not shameful and allowing people to, just feel what they're going to feel. And I was in yoga the other day, and she always sets an intention. And one of the intentions was, when you feel sad, you need to feel it. In fact, she says, I put on sad music to move through that sadness,
Yeah.
because you're not going to be able to get through it until you get through it.
You've got to
You
lean
actually,
in.
yeah, you
Yes.
got to lean in.
You
So I
can't
found
run away.
that, yeah, so I found that very helpful for me too. But it is also very interesting that you say that it wasn't until a couple of months after your surgery that you actually felt that anger. That is, so I had my surgery last December, a year ago, December. And it was in February when I felt super disconnected from my husband. I felt super disconnected from everything. I felt like I was super depressed, anger. I didn't feel like I had any significance whatsoever. I felt like I had no purpose. I had all these things before breast cancer. Then I went through all this breast cancer, which is totally overwhelming and crazy. And then all of a sudden, it was February.
Yep.
And I'm sitting there going, what the hell am I going to do with my life? I didn't even know what I was going to do.
So common. Oh my gosh.
This is when my husband and I started going to therapy. And this is when I started realizing I've got to be part of the breast cancer community. I've got to be part of helping. And that is where Test Those Breasts podcast was born.
Wow.
And it has been the best thing for me, for my healing, but also knowing that I know that it's helping other people. It's not big. It only has 31 episodes at this point, but I do know that it's helping. Because I do have people reach out to me and tell me, Guy, I ran across your podcast, and it's so helpful. There's such great, valuable information. And I will tell you straight up, Ashley, I do not just interview anyone. I'm not like that. Oh my God, I got to have all these interviews. And oh yeah, sure. You want to interview? Sure. I make sure that I vet people, and I make sure that I have knowledge of who they are and what they represent. And I want to make sure that they're very authentic, and they're doing what they're doing out of the kindness and goodness of their hearts. And so that's one of the reasons I also reached out to you, because I knew, I could tell. And so that's what I want to continue with this and build this and collaborate with people like you. And because I just feel like your story is so valuable, and you say things that not everybody would say, and I appreciate that so much.
Thank you.
And I'm going to cry.
Yeah.
I'm going to ugly cry.
I mean, that's when we cry, right? It's striking such an important chord in us, right? I feel like tears are such a validating experience. It means something in us is stirred, right? Like that's important, right? When a lot of times there's like this, I don't want to cry. Cry, girl. Yeah. I mean, right. We need to. There's something important there. Yeah, it's amazing. It's so important. Yeah, and I do want to say, like, sharing all of those things are vulnerable. Because, and I've emphasized this, like, no one wants breast cancer. I didn't want it. Nobody wants to go through that. And I think there's a lot of stuff that we still need to normalize as a community.
Yeah.
And so I want to, and that's where One Tough Cookie sort of was born. And so I talked about my brother bringing a blanket, for me as a gift as I started treatment. one of the pictures he put on my blanket was a cookie, and it said one tough cookie. And the reason he put that on there was because that sort of phrase, that sort of identification has been something that I've always felt connected to since I was a kid. So whenever I was doing something big and hard, I was like, I'm one tough cookie. I'm 5'2". I'm little. I'm like a pint-sized firecracker. Um, and so like just I love the sort of image of this little cookie that was doing these really hard things. So um that sort of that image, that kind of idea stayed with me. And so I've sort of reimagined what being a tough cookie means for me, and kind of how I want to share that with other people. And so for me, the one tough cookie sort of brand mindset really came around the idea of that our strength is actually in our softness. Being tough doesn't actually mean that you're like, the cookie that you can't quite, get into, but you're actually open, that you are authentic, that you're vulnerable, that you're willing to do the hard work of feeling our feelings and sitting with things that are uncomfortable and hard and being honest with ourselves and with other people. And so for me, living in my truth, being authentic, even when it's messy, even when it's hard, being honest with myself and others, that is my way of honoring myself, my story, and also contributing to our community. Because if we don't say the things that we're afraid of, then I want to help, right? We want to help. So then there's another person that's sitting over there in another part of the world or another state that's feeling badly about feeling that way. And if we don't say it, there's isolation from that. And I feel like we don't deserve to be isolated anymore.
So I feel like the last couple of questions, one being, how did you get that fire in your belly to advocate for people? And what advice do you have for our other Pink sisters? You sort of just wrap that up in what you just said. You told us how you got that fire in your belly to start, your one tough cookie. And you also, I would imagine that's your biggest piece of advice, right? Is to allow yourself to walk into those feelings, and that it's okay and this is not your fault, and things like that. um
Yep.
I would like to ask you one more question before we wrap up, and I'm going to ask you also to tell us what resources you have, and how people can, and I'm going to put them in the show notes, so like your contact information. What First of all, did you do reconstruction as well?
Funny you should ask. I
Yeah.
am having a surgery in about 3 days. So I got my double mastectomy August of 2023. Very open about this, and happy to talk more about this with others too. I did what's called a nipple sparing double mastectomy. I only had one tumor in one breast in my
Okay.
right. I chose to do both. And I did opt for reconstruction. So right now, as we're on this podcast, I have my port still here, and I have expanders in.
Okay.
I've chosen delayed surgery. So I got my expanders in August of 23. I've had 5 what they call fills. So for me, I had 5 times that I went in, and they added saline to my expanders to get to the size that I would like. And then today is Friday when we're filming this. I'm on Monday morning or Monday afternoon, I'll be having my exchange surgery. Well, I'll be getting my implants and having that done.
Okay. Well, interesting that you should say that, because I'm having my second phase breast surgery next Wednesday, the 20th, in New Orleans.
No way.
So, so I
Surgery,
did,
surgery
so I did,
twins.
yeah. So I did the deep flap surgery. So I had
Yes.
my double mastectomy and reconstruction last December. I think it was a year ago year ago, the 13th, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in
Wow.
New Orleans, and the 20th is the 1 year anniversary of my post-op where my two surgeons, Dr. Wright and Dr. Cabling, told me I was breast cancer free.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you. So we're
So
flying to New
yay.
Orleans on Sunday and we have my surgery on Wednesday. So I will be thinking about you on Monday and I just wish you all the best on that. You look wonderful. And by the way, if anyone to my audience, make sure that you're following Ashley on Instagram. She is, let's see, you're under one tough cookie underscore 83. And I will put this on in the show notes. I was watching a video of you the other day, or a little reel or whatever, with your wig, your cute long wig that, I mean, you just look so adorable. And then you pulled it off and I'm like, God, she like rocks this whole thing. So by the way, if you are newly diagnosed or if you haven't been diagnosed before, there is a way to actually have some fun with this. Even though it sucks, the fashion and just embracing the bald and all the things. But one tough cookie underscore 83, and also on Facebook, you are on one tough cookie 83. And you have a website called one tough cookie 83.com. And let's see, you have your Gmail account on there. And then you got a resource, tnbcfoundation.org. What is that? Is that?
Yeah, that's another really important part of my story. And we haven't focused on it in this one, but I'm always happy to come back, or I'm always happy to talk more about this. That stands for Triple Negative Breast Cancer Foundation. The
Okay.
reason I have that there as an important resource is I have triple negative breast cancer, or I did. I am now cancer free, but I was diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer, and with there was no hormone positive, receptors in my biopsy, and it is known to be a very aggressive and a less common form of breast cancer. The fact that I did have that high proliferation rate, it's synonymous. I mean, that makes sense. It's congruent with like a triple negative breast cancer. And I identify with that. So there's a lot of sub communities within the breast cancer community, and that's okay to kind of be part of the broader breast cancer community. It's excellent. We need each other. And there's all these different subgroups. And I identify with the triple negative breast cancer community very closely. And the TNBC Foundation is super active online. They have a website, but they also have a lot of social media pages out there. And there's like a TNBC Thrivers page. There's a TNBC Foundations page. And if you've been diagnosed or will get diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer, it can feel very scary. And it also is a space where I want to make sure people know that there's a whole community out there ready to embrace you with arms wide open and to just be part of it, be right there with you, and that's really important. It's been a very valuable community for me, and I go to their support groups, and they have events, and they also are very active in the research community, and they're just wonderful. So the TNBC Foundation, I wanted to make sure I shared with your audience that it exists, and there's a group of people that are there to support you if you are diagnosed with that.
Fantastic. Well, I appreciate your putting that in there because I don't know enough about it, so I will peruse that as well. And that's why we have people like us, because there are resources, and it's just a matter of us trying to make sure that everybody knows about those resources.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time. We will definitely revisit and have another episode together to talk a little bit further about some really important pieces. But number one, I wish you all the best on your surgery. I will be thinking about you and sending you good energy. And I hope that your Christmas is amazing, your New Year's, and we can finally, kind of move through and just keep supporting the breast cancer community and all of our pink sisters out there. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
I think I'll just say that I will echo what a lot of people have said in a lot of different spaces, and that is that the breast cancer community is the worst club with the best members. And it is an honor to know you, to collaborate with you on this platform and in lots of other ways. And I'm sure we will continue to connect. And we can do this. We can do hard things, right? That's another amazing podcast.
We can.
We can do hard things and we can do things together as a community. And we owe it to lean in. And we got you.
Awesome. Well, I would like to go live with you at some point and talk about some things. So I will reach out to you to collaborate on that because I think that those lives are super, super valuable. After all, that's how I met you. So
love it. I'm in.
All right, Ashley. Well, thank you very much. And I just want to thank my audience for joining us on this episode of Test Those Breaths. And we will see you next time on the next episode. Bye for now.